Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this year's Samuel Thorne Memorial Lecture. We are in a new setting for this year's lecture. We're so thrilled that you made it across the river to join us. And I'm very excited to be able to expand our relationship with the Kate. Those of us at the Florence Griswold Museum have long really appreciated the relationship we have here, where we're able to show a lot of our films. And this spring, we will be having our next series of the Frames in Film. If you would like to know more about that, you are welcome to go to the website of the Florence Griswold Museum or the Kate. But here we are able to inaugurate the first of hopefully many years of working together on our Thorne Memorial Lecture. We welcome all of you here in person, as well as those that are joining us virtually for this year's lecture, to hear a wonderful talk by Professor Will Moore of Boston University. Professor Moore is Associate Professor of American Material Culture. He holds a joint appointment between the Department of History of Art and Architecture and the American and New England Studies program. An interdisciplinary American Studies scholar, he has specialties in material culture, the built environment, and cultural history. He holds an AB in folklore and mythology from Harvard University and both an MA and PhD from the American and New England Studies program at Boston University. He researches, lectures, and publishes on vernacular architecture, folk art, American fraternalism, public history, the interpretation of historic sites, and the history of surfing. He is the author of the subject of today's talk, Shaker Fever, America's 20th Century Fascination with a Communitarian Sect, and Masonic Temples, Freemasonry, Ritual Architecture, and Masculine Archetypes. He has contributed numerous articles to exhibition catalogs, books, and scholarly journals. He serves on the editorial boards of the journals Winterthur Portfolio and Buildings and Landscapes. Will is currently working on a book on the architecture of Cape Cod and its adjacent islands, which will be published by the University of Virginia Press as part of the Society of Architectural Historians Buildings of the United States series. And on a personal note, I'm thrilled to be having Will here along with his wife, Charlotte. Will was my dissertation advisor at BU, so this is a very personal and professional thrill to have him here joining us. So without further ado, Will Moore.
So we've been moving this mic back and forth, up and down. All right. So I want to start out first by thanking Becky Beaulieu and the staff of the Florence Griswold Museum for inviting me to be here with you today. I'm very honored to be able to provide the 2021 Samuel Thorne Memorial Lecture. After this extended period of isolation, it's a real pleasure to be out and about and speaking at Old Saybrook's Katharine Hepburn Cultural Arts Center. What a jewel this is. And this year's Thorne lecture examines the activities of William Winter, an industrial photographer who had a remarkable impact upon the rediscovery and reinterpretation of the legacy of the Shakers, a celibate communitarian Protestant sect with roots in Great Britain, which was established in the United States at the end of the 18th century, including in Connecticut, and which flourished in the 19th century. So my talk today, if I can get the, this is always the problem. Let's see. There we go. My talk today is part of a book entitled Shaker Fever, published in 2020 by the University of Massachusetts Press. And my understanding is that copies of the book will be available for sale in the lobby after the lecture. Now, in Shaker Fever, I examine the American fascination with the Shakers in the years between 1925 and 1965. In this period, the American public changed from thinking about the Shakers as an extremist religious cult, which you hoped that your kids would not join, to understanding them as exemplifying many of the nation's most cherished qualities, including piety, sobriety, and industriousness. This transformation in how the Shakers were understood was the result of the actions of many people across the United States, including museum directors, choreographers, writers, folklorists, and antique dealers. It's really, a broad-ranging public history story. And even the professional staff of summer camps for teenagers were involved in this reinterpretation. But the focus of my attention today is simply one of these figures, William Winter. Now, between 1923 and his premature death in 1939, William F. Winter, Jr. created an extensive body of modernist photographic images that allowed curators, collectors, and other enthusiasts to claim the Northeast Shaker communities as vital American predecessors of modernism. And on the screen are two of Winter's iconic photographic images from the middle of the 1930s. Winter manipulated the architecture and material culture of the waning celibate communitarian Shaker villages in western Massachusetts and eastern New York State to create these stunning, carefully crafted black and white compositions emphasizing form, line, and pattern. These seminal images, broadly reproduced starting almost immediately after their production and continuing up to the present, have profoundly shaped the national and international understanding of this regional sect and influenced many subsequent photographers, artists, and preservationists. And if you look at a survey text of American art these days, you will probably see one of these photographs. And if it's not a photograph like this, then it's going to be one that's derivative of it. Now, in the last 20 years, a burgeoning literature has begun to analyze the Shakers in relation to 20th century design and culture. And this scholarship has largely focused on the activities of Faith and Edward Deming Andrews, collectors, dealers, and promoters of Shaker material, and has yet to adequately recognize Winter and his photographic contribution to the popular understanding of the Shakers as purveyors of minimalist design. So today, I'm going to provide an overview of Winter's oeuvre, explore his relationships with influential museum administrators, and place his images within their historical and institutional contexts. By doing so, I hope to more adequately recognize Winter's contribution, engage the manner in which curators, journalists, and designers have employed the idea of Shaker design, and truthfully, to problematize our popular understanding of Shaker material culture. Now, William Winter was among the first Americans to find aesthetic pleasure in Shaker architecture and material culture. Now, this idea that Shaker furniture is fine craftsmanship and should be valued and that it belongs in museums, that is so pervasive in American culture that it's hard to believe that there was someone that had to invent or create that idea. But William Winter is the one that did it. Born in Albany, New York in 1899, Winter grew up in Schenectady, New York, where his father was employed by General Electric, which played a dominant role in that city's economy. Having gone to the Schenectady Public High School, by the age of 20, he was employed by the company as a clerk. And after taking courses offered by GE, by 1930, he had advanced in his career to being an electrical engineer. But in the intervening years, however, he developed an interest in photography which would define his identity for the rest of his short life. And as an avocation, he began to create photographs of local scenery of upstate New York. By 1933, Winter had successfully transformed his hobby into a vocation as a photographer employed by General Electric. At this time, GE included a photographic department generating images for public relations. And the American Studies scholar David E. Nye has noted that GE's industrial photographs were produced with an aesthetic emphasizing sharp focus, a clear subject, and compositions which allowed the viewer to ignore the fact that the photographer was acting as a mediator. Within this context, Winter produced machine-age images of industrial equipment, products, and processes. Winter's photographs portray the products and mechanisms of General Electric's plants within the parameters of the company's industrial photography. However, they also demonstrate an awareness of the two-dimensionality of the picture plane and celebrate form and massing. An image of voltage meters on the left exhibits both Winter's fascination with repeated geometric forms and his utilization of shadows as a compositional device. A photograph of an electrical shunt manufactured by the firm on the right shows his love of shadows and uses an angled composition to emphasize the parallel and perpendicular lines inherent in the mechanism's fabric. Now, as an American Studies scholar, I can tell you that what a shunt is it's a device that allows electric current to pass around another point in the circuit by creating a path of lower resistance. So that's what this thing is on the right. This aesthetic object is actually an important electrical device. Now, Winter, like other early 20th century modernist photographers, including Edward Weston and Barbara Morgan, created botanical images as well, celebrating pattern, symmetry, and organic form. Overall, his oeuvre demonstrates that although employed in industry, he was aware of the modernist photographic conventions being created by artists including Weston, Morgan, Paul Strand, and Charles Sheeler. Now, in the early decades of the 20th century, this cohort of photographers influenced by modernism came to see photography as a way to create graphic compositions rather than to create accurate representations of reality or to mimic paintings. As you can observe from Charles Sheeler's influential photographic image of Henry Ford's River Rouge plant from 1927 on the left, and Paul Strand's image of Wall Street from 1915 on the right, these artists emphasized geometric forms and accentuated the play of light upon surfaces. They framed their works in innovative manners that presented only a fragment of the subject matter and which challenged audiences to view the composition as abstractions rather than representations. Sheeler's image is an investigation of cylinders more than it is a portrait of a factory. Strand's streetscape is as much a celebration of a series of rectangles as it is a document concerning the architecture or the life of New Yorkers. When these artists turned their viewfinders on botanical subject matters, they similarly emphasized geometry, pattern, and abstraction. Edward Weston's photograph of a toadstool from 1930 is not meant as a guide for recognizing a particular species. Rather, it is a meditation upon striations and shadow. The subject of the photograph, rather than being fungal, could be made of clay or concrete without being significantly detrimental to the impact of this particular image. The work transcends the subject matter. The black and white patterns appearing on the photographic plane are more important than any intellectual connection to eukaryotic organisms. The sinuous form of Barbara Morgan's cornstalk is not easily recognizable as such without the title. Morgan's reputation was established through photographs of American modern choreographers, including Martha Graham and Doris Humphrey. And the twisting surfaces of this specimen, brought into stark relief by lighting from the left of the image, may have reminded the photographer of a dancer's body in motion. It might be worth noting that Morgan, as a student at UCLA, curated an exhibition of Weston's work and was also married to Willard D. Morgan, who served as photo editor of Life magazine and also as the first director of photography for the Museum of Modern Art. And I mention these interconnections to show you that this is a photographic movement, that there's multiple people involved and the ideas are being passed around. Now, Morgan also took the photograph of Doris Humphrey's dance group impersonating Shakers, which appears on the cover of my book. Now, this group of artists, including but not limited to Sheeler, Strand, Weston, and Morgan, understood photography as the art form of the 20th century, and they established canonical approaches for how to use light to create modernist compositions. So through his professional activities and his amateur proclivities, Winter came to understand the vocabulary of the modernists and to apply it in the images he created. The Shakers, their buildings, and their material culture became the primary focus of Winter's artistic output. Beginning around 1923, the photographer visited the Shaker villages of Watervliet and Mount Lebanon, New York, with his camera. And in doing so, he recorded the villages which were on the brink of closing while simultaneously training himself as a photographer. He would later say of what he called his quote-unquote Shaker portfolio that its, quote, growth and development coincided with the growth and development of the photographer himself as a photographer, and that it led through a series of events almost miraculous in nature to a complete and happy change of profession. So he was training himself as a photographer, taking these Shaker photographs so that he would have a portfolio to show to the people at GE so that he could move from being a clerk and an electrical engineer to being a photographer professionally. Now, Winter used Shaker materials to explore the capabilities and inherent qualities of his artistic medium. He was not an anthropologist recording specimens. Rather, he was an artist exploring Shaker artifacts to create appealing compositions. At his death, a close acquaintance explained, quote, Winter was one of those who have been able to recognize the unusual values in our immediate environment. He saw beauty in the Shaker handicrafts and recognized the importance of their contribution to American life, end quote. Winter, however, expressed this beauty in the conventions of his medium and the moment in which he was creating. His modernist photography of Shaker spaces revel in formal compositional devices, particularly flat surfaces, geometric forms, symmetry, shadows, and empty spaces. His April 1925 photograph of the northwest corner of the second Shaker meeting house in Watervliet, New York, for example, represents Winter's ability to use Shaker architecture to create an abstract geometric composition. The divisions of space created by the spindles of the railing in the foreground echo the vertical rectangles of the doors and the windows, which in turn are subdivided by mullions. The sun shining through the windows play upon the plane of the floor to create bright parallelograms stretching away at an acute angle from the dark wainscoting. Think again of that Paul Strand image of Wall Street. Dark interior windows meant to allow the Shaker ministry to observe the believers at worship punctuate the far wall, adding yet another set of forms to this austere concatenation of quadrilaterals. This remarkable early photograph presages the many later Shaker images reproduced repeatedly upon which the photographer's reputation rests. Winter's embrace of modernist photographic tactics is evident in his image of the Church Family Sisters Workshop of the Watervliet Shaker Village near Albany, which you see here on the right. In this slide, I have contrasted Winter's image with a documentary photograph on the left of the same building, made for the New York State Museum by Edwin J. Stein in October of 1927. Stein's workmanlike image, again, this is the one on the left, taken in three-quarter view to record two facades, provides a visual reference for the appearance of the structure which was about the demolished. The state of New York and the county of Albany tore this building down. So in this image by Stein, the building is located in the center of the image and is surrounded by a margin of lawn, sky, and trees. And from this photograph, we can note the symmetry of the architecture as well as the relatively fussy, somewhat Victorian porch which shelters the front entrance. It is an image made by a professional museum photographer used to recording a range of material objects, including geologic and zoologic specimens and Native American wampum belts. Right, so Stein was a documentary photographer working for the New York State Museum. In contrast, when photographing the same building in April 1925, Winter positioned his camera such that only a fraction of the near facade was included, and the intersection of two walls created a border between light and shadow that almost equally divided the view. Unlike Stein, Winter did not accentuate symmetry, but once again filled the composition with multiple light and dark quadrilaterals, the granite lintels contrasting with the recessed glazed fenestration. The bright lighting from the left creates a three-dimensional quality to the roof's cornice, while simultaneously obscuring the details of the building's eave facade by casting mottled tree shadows upon it. While Stein provided his employer with a portrait of the same Shaker building, Winter produced a sophisticated abstract composition which simultaneously served as an argument for the monumentality and grandeur of the Shaker's architecture. Stein was paid by the New York State government to make the image on the left to document an aspect of the state's heritage which was about to be razed. Winter created the picture on the right to develop himself as a photographer. In doing so, he utilized the tactics of the cutting-edge modernist photographers, including using raking light, editing his view so that the subject bled over the edge of the frame, emphasizing shadow and geometric repetition, and tending towards abstraction. Many of Winter's photographs of the spaces in these villages actually occupied by the Shakers can be shocking to modern eyes who have come to equate the Shaker aesthetic with simplicity and a lack of ornamentation. His image of the sewing room of the South family at Watervliet, for example, has patterned materials applied to the floor, walls, and ceiling, and includes no less than 3 patterned ornamental throw rugs. Jigsaw-cut foliation ornaments the door. An ornate Victorian clock stands on the table in the corner of the room. So looking at this image, I'm not sure that it could easily be captioned Shaker simplicity. Similarly, this Winter image of Eldris Anna Case's dwelling room from the South family at Watervliet, New York, includes linoleum floors, layered with patterned rugs and decorative wallpaper. An ornate cast iron stove dominates the center of the room, while artworks in decorative frames hang on the walls. An embellished clock peeks in from the left margin. The bed, which is actually a Shaker piece manufactured in the Shaker village itself, has ornamental turned finials completing each of its corner posts. As we contemplate this space, keep in mind that it was occupied not simply by a Shaker sister, but rather by an Eldris, by one of the spiritual leaders of the village. I also adore this Winter photograph of the dining room in the dwelling house of the Shaker village in Hancock, Massachusetts, now at the center of the preserved Hancock Shaker village. Please note the framed photographs on the wall, the Victorian glass front cabinet against the far wall, the potted plants on the windowsills, and most prominently, the patterned floor covering stretching into the distance. I also ask you to recognize that the wooden dining chairs on either side of the table appear to be standard 19th century wooden seating furniture manufactured in places like Gardner, Massachusetts, rather than iconic Shaker ladder-back chairs. Winter, however, has played a little game on us by positioning a desirable minimalist Shaker chair in the light by the window, where our eye will be drawn to it. So Winter, who's documenting this space, also recognizes that the Shaker furniture is beautiful and wants us to see it, even when it's in a context of patterned linoleum. Now, while photographing the Shaker villages, Winter encountered Dr. Charles C. Adams, a zoologist and specialist in snail habitats, who had assumed the directorship of the New York State Museum in 1925. At approximately the same time, Albany County acquired portions of the declining Watervliet Shaker Village for use as a charitable home and also as a regional airport. Adams, who was under political pressure to expand his museum's historical holdings, understood the transformation of the Watervliet Shaker Village as an opportunity to fulfill his museum's mission of collecting and interpreting the state's history while strategically improving the institution's collection of artifacts. He gathered masses of Shaker objects from county employees who viewed them as excess property, cluttering up the buildings which were about to be demolished. So I've got wonderful correspondence from the people in charge of the Shaker Village who say, yeah, take whatever you want, because we're going to destroy it anyhow. So anything that goes to the museum is good that we don't have to pay to take to the dump. Adams also sent out Edwin J. Stein, the museum staff photographer, to document the villages on the site. And Stein produced a number of images, including this one showing the items about to be transported to the museum, and also the workmanlike image of the sisters' workshop I showed you previously. Now, Adams's approach to the Shakers was essentially ecological. He sought to understand how this sect of religious believers functioned within their geographic, natural, and economic contexts, just as in his doctoral dissertation, he had investigated how snails interacted with their environments in the bottom of streams. The Shaker artifacts that Adams accessioned into the museum's collections undergirded the museum's historical mission, but were also comparable to bivalve shells or moose antlers. They were remnants left behind by living things which provided evidence of how these organisms acted within their surroundings. Adams did not find beauty in these Shaker materials. In his annual reports, he referred to them as, quote, homely objects, end quote, and suggested that few antique collectors would be interested in them. Winter, however, convinced him of the beauty of the Shaker materials, and the two became close friends. Together, they traveled the region visiting Shaker villages so that Adams could acquire supplementary items for the state's collections, while Winter added new locations and vistas to his growing portfolio. Once word spread that the New York State Museum was acquiring Shaker artifacts, Faith and Edward Deming Andrews sought out Adams. Natives of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, the Andrewses were making ends meet as antique dealers. Starting in the mid-1920s, the couple had been actively buying and selling the Shaker materials available in western Massachusetts and eastern New York State. The Andrewses both retailed Shaker objects to collectors and also acted as wholesalers to other dealers, including department stores like B. Altman and Company in New York City. So they would buy things cheap in Pittsfield and sell them at a raised price in the city. And on the screen are images from the Andrews' paper at Winter Tour of Shaker antiques in and around the Andrews' house in Pittsfield. And these are the kinds of images that they would send out to their clientele, saying, are you interested in this? Now, as they dealt in Shaker chairs, tables, and case pieces and other objects, the Andrewses realized that there was a dearth of information concerning their stock in trade. With the help of Homer Eaton Kayes, the editor of the magazine Antiques, they began to remedy this gap in the literature with two seminal articles published in August of 1928 and April of 1929, just as the American economy was unwinding. Entitled respectively, Craftsmanship of an American Religious Sect, Notes on Shaker Furniture, and the second article was called The Furniture of an American Religious Sect. These articles, illustrated with items from the Andrews' holdings, provided the journal's readers with an introduction to Shaker furniture. The articles emphasized how little was known about the topic, but provided examples of various forms, information about the time period and region in which the furniture was produced, and also data concerning the colors in which objects were finished. The decorative art scholar John Kirk has noted that the first of these articles works to embed Shaker furniture within larger American joinery traditions, while the second article intellectually separates the Shakers and their furniture from the outside world. Now, the images which accompany these two early articles are surprisingly unsophisticated. The chairs, tables, beds, and case pieces in them have been removed from the historical context and placed against a neutral background. Consistently taken from a position above the right front corner of the item being portrayed, these naive images were probably produced by the dealers themselves, possibly in their house in Pittsfield. In many of the images, folds and ripples are evident in the cloth, which has been draped under and behind the objects. These photographs, like the others that the couple produced of Shaker furnishings, might have been useful for communicating to their clientele about the latest acquisitions available for purchase. Kays, the editor of Antiques, subsequently wrote to Andrews asking, quote, "Have you any idea where we could get hold of a competent photographer?" Now, together, Adams and Winter and the Andrewses decided to mount an exhibition of Shaker materials at the New York State Museum. And in his annual report for 1930, Adams writes that the show occurred, quote, "at Mr. Winter's suggestion and with the hearty cooperation of Dr. and Mrs. Edward D. Andrews." However, it benefited all three parties. For Adams, the exhibition demonstrated that the museum was fulfilling its mission and allowed him to spotlight the collections he had been building. For Winter, it showcased his work and provided institutional validation for his developing pictorial abilities. For the Andrewses, the exhibition provided an opportunity to exhibit the materials that they had gathered and confirmed their status as experts on the Shakers. The exhibition was called The Community Industries of the Shakers, and it opened to the public on June 17, 1930. Walter Rendell Story of the New York Times would later assert that it was, quote, "the first exhibition devoted to Shaker works," end quote. Photographs of the installation reveal a show which uneasily balances the priorities of the collaborators. Photographic, industrial, and household interpretations of the sect were displayed in parallel, largely segregated spaces. Winter loaned photographs of Watervliet and New Lebanon, which were mounted on vertical exhibition furniture and displayed in glass-top cases, and you can see that up at the top. The museum's collections of materials related to the herb industry were installed to present a simulacrum of the interior of an industrial workshop. There it is on the bottom left, and that's Adams's interest in the economy and the ecology. And then a third space was filled with materials largely loaned by Dr. and Mrs. Andrews to illustrate the sect's household arts on the bottom right. Now, this exhibition proved popular and remained installed in the gallery until July 1st, 1932. Building upon the popularity of the exhibition, in 1933, the New York State Museum published a volume written by Ted Andrews and illustrated with photographs by Winter, which set a new standard for how Shaker material culture would be represented. The most noteworthy of the book's new figures were William Winter photographs of Shaker objects owned by the Andrewses, which placed these antiques within empty, austere, geometric Shaker rooms. Figure 23 from the book, for example, represents a Shaker cobbler's bench from New Lebanon's second family, identified as being from the Andrewses' collection. As with the photographs that the Andrews used to accompany their articles in Antiques, the item being documented has been photographed at an angle from above the right front corner. Rather than being placed against a wrinkled sheet, however, this bench has been located within a sparse architectural space defined by a wooden floor and a white plaster wall. The diagonal position of the bench cuts across the parallel lines of the floor's planks. A Shaker peg rail slashes across the work, both identifying the aesthetic space as belonging to the sect and dividing an elongated white rectangle from the main section of the photograph. As this rail could easily have been cropped out if the photographer desired a closer shot of the bench, It must be understood as an important element of an artistic composition. This deceptively simple documentary photograph of a cobbler's bench, redolent of Winter's love of quadrilaterals and planar surfaces, elevates its subject matter through its artistic construction. The contrast between this work and the amateurish photographs that the Andrews submitted to Antiques is telling. Winter similarly photographed a spinning wheel in the corner of a shaker space with white walls and a wooden floor. This image is an investigation of the geometric interactions of circles and rectangles. Within the visual context of the receding wall planes, the string which connects the large wheel to the base of the spindle suggests an optical illusion of a cone, while a photographic representation of a spinning wheel within a bare room, the multiple geometric shapes, including the cone, the circles, the rectangles of the walls and the floor, and the truncated acute triangle formed by the ceiling, which is also echoed by the white space below the spinning wheel's body, easily dissolve into abstraction if the viewer loses focus upon the subject content. This image is reminiscent of a composition by Picabia or of a fictional Dadaist machine. Now, figure 60 in the book, an image of a slat-back rocking chair, has all of the common elements of this series. The shaker object is positioned on a wooden floor in front of a white wall, punctuated at the top by a peg rail. In this incident, however, the photographer has introduced an additional compositional element by placing a rectangular rug under the chair. The dark stripes in this rug, along with the cracks in the floor and the back stiles of the chair, form vertical elements in the composition which create tension with the horizontals formed by the near edge of the rug, the foot molding, the chair splats, and the peg rail. The placement of the rug transforms the photograph in another fashion as well. While the images of the cobbler's bench and the spinning wheel are still obviously documentary photographs of furniture taken within an empty room, the composition of the chair and the rug begs to be understood not as a portrait of a chair, but rather as representing a room. This image, with its multiple related furnishings within a defined space, can now be understood as interior design, as not recording craftsmanship, but as portraying an aesthetic. The spare, plain, austere taste of this image, however, was not created by the Shakers. It was contrived by Winter, the photographer, by artificially arranging shaker materials within a bare shaker space. Now, having developed a visual formula for powerful, attractive simulations of shaker interior design for this 1933 publication, Winter and the Andrewses reproduced it repeatedly in the years to come. Now, with the success of the exhibition at the New York State Museum in Albany, Winter and the Andrewses subsequently were recruited by Laura Bragg, the transformative and visionary director of the Berkshire Museum in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, to mount an exhibition for her institution. This show, in October 1932, in turn gained the attention of Juliana Force of New York City's Whitney Museum. And Force latched on to the shaker materials as a way to further her institution's nationalist promotion of a distinct tradition in American visual culture. When Shaker Handicrafts, that was the name of Force's exhibition, opened at the Whitney in November of 1935, like the show at the New York State Museum 5 years earlier, it included shaker items owned by the Andrews and Winter's photographs of shaker architecture and furniture. Exhibited at the nexus of American artistic and publishing world, however, these materials suddenly gained national attention. They had not, in Albany, they'd gotten some attention, but at the Whitney, suddenly the nation was paying attention. And Winter's elegant geometric compositions were published in the New York Times, the Christian Science Monitor, Antiques, and many other influential periodicals. And Winter's beautiful images were subsequently used also to illustrate the Andrewses' canonical book on Shaker furniture that was published by Yale University Press and that was reissued by Dover Publications and stayed in print for decades. And I think it's probably still in print today. Many Americans who were concurrently looking at Farm Security Administration photographs being distributed by the U.S. government as part of the New Deal effort to illustrate America to itself, many Americans mistook these images for documentary evidence of Shaker folkways, when they were actually carefully contrived compositions created by a modernist photographer and an antiques dealer. And they were distributed to publicize a show promoting artistic nationalism. Published repeatedly in multiple venues, these images established a canonical representation of the sect embraced by subsequent artists and designers down to the present. In 1936, for example, the Index of American Design, a New Deal agency, dispatched two photographers, Noel Vincentini and George Hurlick, to Hancock and Pittsfield, Massachusetts, to document Shaker architecture and decorative arts. The images created by these men can fairly be described as derivative of Winter's work. On the right, you see Winter's image, and on the left, a photograph by Vincentini and Hurlick. Now, although I will not elaborate today on the exact process by which it happened, Winter's photographs also subsequently inspired American furniture designers. Most notably, Frida Diamond created a line of Shaker-inspired furniture in 1937. Manufactured by the Herman Miller Furniture Company of Zeeland, Michigan, one of the leading modernist manufacturers in the country, and distributed through high-end department stores, including Wanamaker's in New York and J.W. Robinson in Los Angeles, Diamond's furniture received great acclaim in the press. One journalist called it, quote, naively sophisticated, end quote. Another wrote, bridging the gap between yesterday and today, it solves the home furnisher's problem of going modern, but in a conservative way. Although Diamond's designs expressed the nativist and nationalist zeitgeist of the 1930s, because of the ongoing depression, it did not sell well, and it was quickly discontinued. And although there are many photographs of this furniture, in the years that I've been working on this project, I've never seen an actual piece of it. This furniture from the 1930s is the holy grail of this project. And when I give a talk like this, I always inquire, does anybody in the audience have this in their basement? Do you know where there might be some of this? Now, Paul MacCabre's 1951 Predictor Suite also sought to rethink Shaker design in relation to mid-century modernism. Produced by the O'Hearn Manufacturing Company of Gardner, Massachusetts, MacCabre's suite included a drop-leaf dining table, a desk, and a break-funk cabinet, among other forms. Macabre highlighted features identifiable as being derived from Shaker precedents and particularly from Winter's photographs. The Milwaukee Journal reported that, quote, Macabre has turned to early American sources for inspiration, yet the group is definitely modern, without frills or fussiness. Possibly the most successful mass-produced Shaker-inspired furniture was manufactured, let's see if I can get it. There you go. Was manufactured by North Carolina's Drexel Furniture Company to designs by the Californians Kip Stewart and Stuart McDougall. Introduced in 1958, the Declaration line included approximately 50 different pieces that could be used throughout a residence. And this line was kept in production for more than a decade and was extremely popular. During the Cold War, this furniture was marketed as, quote, being as American as the Declaration of Independence and as modern as the space age. When the furniture was introduced to the public in the Los Angeles Times in 1958, the newspaper published this image on the right by the Californian photographer Dale Healy that placed Drexel chairs within a spare geometric black and white homage to William Winter's photographic compositions. designed by Californians and manufactured in North Carolina and marketed from Texas to Minnesota and from Boston to California. The Declaration furniture line indicates that by the end of the 1950s, an interest in Shaker furniture and design had become more than a local or regional phenomenon. And this furniture is widely available through antique dealers and is extremely expensive, more than you would expect. Like that bench in the front and the far left sells usually for about $2,500 when you can get one. So none of these sets of furniture would have been produced without William Winter's lovely modernist portraits of Shaker furniture. I will also note in passing that the manner in which Shaker villages have been preserved over the last 50 years mean that visitors in the present have access to spaces that actually more closely resemble Winter's modernist photographic confections than they do the spaces that he photographed earlier, which show spaces that were shaped and inhabited by actual living Shakers. In preserving and restoring Shaker compounds, well-meaning curators and administrators tore up the linoleum, took down the pictures, and purified the environment to produce a codified Shaker aesthetic. So on the top of this slide, you have the dining hall in the Hancock church family dwelling house in 1926, and on the right is how it appears now when it's open to the public. So in conclusion, this afternoon, I have attempted to demonstrate how our current visual conception of the Shakers is largely the construct of a single individual, an industrial photographer employed by General Electric and conversant with the tenets of American photographic modernism, turned his lens on Shaker architecture and material culture. In cooperation with antique dealers and museum administrators, he created compelling images which captured the American public's interest while masking the lived reality of the Shaker villages. In the future, I hope that historians, art historians, photographic historians, and decorative art scholars can appreciate the artistry and influence of this under-recognized photographer without simultaneously conflating his modernist aesthetic with that of the Shakers themselves. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to answer questions if people have them. Yeah?
If according to the photographs, the Shakers weren't actually using the furniture they made, where was that furniture going?
Well, they were using it, but also they were never making enough of it to fill the entire village, so that they were having this store-bought stuff, and then also things that members of the community brought into the community with them. And then by the time these photographs are being taken, the villages are closing down. And so a lot of the furniture that they're making, or which they made, which they might not have found all that comfortable, ended up being put up in attics or being stored in empty buildings, which is where antique dealers like the Andrewses were able to get their hands on it.
So you showed us how Winters gets his start photographing commercially made goods, and then those kind of commercially made goods get edited out of the Shaker environments. And I'm wondering as somebody who kind of clearly could admire the aesthetic qualities of factory-made things, what do you think motivated him to kind of not somehow find a modernist line in the Victorian, molding in the doorway or something like that? Like what's going on there with this kind of getting out of these images, commercially made stuff?
Right. So the first thing is that when he's taking these interior images, I think from the beginning he liked images like this, right? But to get into the buildings, you know, and to take the photographs, he couldn't ask the Shaker ladies to, can you move this stuff out of the way so I can take a good picture? You know, and I think he also wanted to, this one in particular, this case piece ends up at the New York State Museum. And this case piece becomes iconic. It's recorded by the Index of American Design. It's exhibited, the images from the Index of American Design is exhibited over and over again. Almost every Shaker exhibition has this case piece in it. So my reading of this photograph is that Winter goes in to photograph this case piece, right? And that's what he's really interested in. He's not interested in all of the patterned things. He's not interested in the stove. He's interested in the case piece. So he takes this photograph to record it, and also to record the interior of it. But what he's really interested in is these kinds of images, right? Particularly, you know, the spinning wheel, right? And Andrews, who is also promoting this stuff, he's not interested in promoting this kind of image because this kind of image doesn't say that Shaker stuff is kind of special. This says Shaker stuff is stuff that's owned by your dotty old grandmother who has too much stuff in her house, right? So, John Kirk says about these images that they're redolent of modernism and of the antique dealer's showroom. You know, I'm not the first one to come up with this, right? That Andrews is promoting these images because these images make the Shaker furniture that he's buying cheap on the site. These are making these American modernism, which he can sell expensively in New York City. Does that answer your question? And then Andrews ends up being, Andrews is a very complicated figure, which I can't get into in any depth here, but he ends up being the first curator at Hancock, and he is, you know, there's correspondence between Andrews and Amy Bess Miller, who's the president of the board at Hancock, and then becomes the director, which is, there's a problem there when you've got the president of the board also being the director, but that's who Amy Bess Miller was. You know, no director could work under her, so she ended up being the one that was the director as well as running the board. And there's correspondence between Andrews and Amy Bess Miller where she wants the buildings to be open as soon as possible to get the paying visitors through, and Andrews says, no, we can't open it, I haven't stripped out the linoleum yet. You know, I haven't taken it back to its Shaker purity, and we have to have the Shaker purity before we can let the visitors in. Yes?
Do we know what pre-Victorian Shaker interiors looked like?
Do we know what previous?
Pre-Victorian.
Pre-Victorian. Well, part of the problem is that there aren't photographs, right? That there are drawings, right? But how are, you know, the Charles Dickens goes to a Shaker village and talks about how terrible it is, you know, how depressing it is, how the souls of the Shakers have all been stamped upon. And certainly Benjamin Lessing goes and makes drawings of the interior, and Lessing is interested in portraying the Shakers as being different from American society. So again, all of those things, they claim Shaker sparseness, but what does that mean, you know, compared to American materialism, you know? It's just like Quaker 18th century highboy chests, right, which have all of the ornamentation, all of the Rococo design on the top, and yet they're being used and built by people who are proclaiming Quaker simplicity and sparseness. So again, the documentary evidence certainly leans towards sparseness in the Shaker surroundings, but what they actually looked like, what is the evidence? And as I say, when Shaker people, when converts came into the village, they brought their material goods with them. And being parsimonious Yankees, and I'm a parsimonious Yankee myself, I can say that, I'm sure that the Yankees weren't throwing the furniture out just because it didn't appeal with their aesthetic. You had a question.
I'm curious what your new scholarship, what kind of response you've gotten to this scholarship from the museum curators and directors and leaders of places like Hancock Shaker Village. And also there's a new museum or reopened museum in Old Chatham, New York, that would seem like a wonderful opportunity to embrace this, to utilize your scholarship in their presentation.
Yeah, it's been mixed. It's been mixed. Some people have been very pleased and said, I've been sniffing this all along, and isn't it great that on the third floor of the Hancock Shaker Village we still have a lot of the linoleum left. Other people have said, how dare you, this is sacred ground. But if you go up to Sabbath Day Lake in Maine, they actually have preserved Victorian Shaker interiors that, because it was a living village in the period of high modernism, the curators didn't get in there, and they're very proud of their Victorian Shaker interiors. But you have to, but again, they don't get celebrated by the art historians who want to talk about modernism. And the museum in Old Chatham is very interesting in that, again, I talked about how different people bring different biases. Adams wanted to bring in the ecological in a broader sense versus Winter having this clean modernism vision. John Williams, who was the founder and collector at Old Chatham, he was a Republican stockbroker, and he saw the Shakers he didn't like the communal aspect of Shaker life, but he liked the entrepreneurial and business part of it. So when he was collecting, he was not collecting modernist stuff. He was collecting things that showed that what inventors they were. He kind of saw the Shakers as being the A&R department of a research and development department of a Fortune 500. So he liked, Shaker clothes washers, that were built to do laundry on a large scale for the entire village. He collected a Shaker-made fire engine because he liked the pump mechanism. And it's only after John Williams dies and other people get in charge of that museum that they start then to regurgitate the modernism line that's so salable. So it's kind of interesting to see how these institutions, their interpretation changes over time depending on what will bring the visitors across the doorstep.
So your sense is that Winter really brought the aesthetic to artists in New York City, really, to the attention of the museums, Museum of Modern Art, the New York Times, and right in that center core, there was Sheila, there was Doris Humphrey, reading the New York Times, being part of that and absorbing that aesthetic. So that it's kind of it's fascinating to me that Bob and Morgan fell into exactly what they were wanting to do in their sense of modernism. And so you're pointing to Winter as the one who was bringing that to the fore.
Yes, and Doris Humphrey is working on this at approximately the same time, and she, right, and then the Morgan photographs happen a little bit after the Winter photographs, but Humphrey is starting to do the Dance of the Chosen, kind of. They're doing it at the same time, and she's motivated by trying to find an American dance. And she likes the idea of the fact that the Shakers are dancing as worship. And she's trying to find a way to express through dance the essence of American identity. Just like Aaron Copland is writing Appalachian Spring and using the Shaker song, A Gift to Be Simple, to express nationalism in classical music. So, and just like just like Winter's photographs are abstracting on the Shakers to get to his aesthetic, Humphrey is using images of Shaker worship and creating a composition that is called Dance of the Chosen, but has nothing to do with Shaker worship. And there's even correspondence where she says the point is not to be portraying Shaker dance. The point is to create a new composition. So she says, these are like modernist peaches. You know, you look at a modernist painting of a peach, and you don't see a peach. You see the color, the abstraction. So this dance is an abstraction, a modernist abstraction on Shaker worship. And you're not supposed to go to it to learn about the Shakers. You're supposed to go to it to appreciate my composition. Again, that artist's ego.
It's true that the costuming was, and the formations, the men on one side and the women on the other, the use of the hands, all those were derivatives of what she pulled from what she knew about Shaker culture.
Right, based upon lithographs and
Another figure who was a singer and the use of the vocal thing.
right.
It's really interesting to me how these artists from the 30s they were a smaller group after all, and they were all influencing one another, and they really picked up on this Shaker thing.
Right, I find that interesting too. That's why I wrote a book about it. Right, and chapter three in the book, the first section of that is about Doris Humphrey. So I think you'll enjoy that.
Do you know about angel reapers? Angel reapers is Martha Clark's 6 years ago. She did it at the Signature Theater.
Yeah. The book is mostly about 1925 to 1965, and the last piece of choreography I talk about is Borrowed Light, another Shaker-inspired piece of choreography. Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate your attention and your questions.